Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. It's the last Sunday in February, the shortest month of the year. This is my birthday month. It's Black History Month. It's the month of flowers and hearts and roses, beautiful roses behind me. And I was reading this morning, or actually, my device, I'm not going to say her name because she'll start talking to me, said that the reason that this is the shortest month of the year, and I don't know if this is true or not, is because Caesar Augustus was very upset that August, which was named after him, of course, was at that time the shortest month of the year. So he took a few months out of a couple of other months, and February got short shrift, and here we are. For this to be the shortest month of the year, however, I have so many friends that are born this month. Speaking of friends, our guest today, Michael Lavine, was not born in February. At least I don't think he was. But we go way back. We've known each other probably a lot longer than either one of us can remember. But first of all, Michael, thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking.
And for those of you who do not know, this man right here is the go-to man if you need any sheet music, any obscure song, anything that's lost out there. We're going to find out how this all began with Michael today. But Michael, I want to ask you before we start, today, unfortunately, marks 353 days since our theaters shut down. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. And I want to ask, because I know that you're one of the busiest men in the business. If you're not working on a show, you're at a show. Anywhere in the world, you'll get on a plane, you and Steven Brenberg, and we'll go anywhere if it's a show that appeals to you. But how are you dealing really with everything that's going on right now?
I've been doing fine. I mean, I'm a little addicted to television, so which I've always been, and I'm spending a lot more time watching old television shows. But I'm also finding more and more motivation to sit down and play piano because I have so much music here. I mean, literally tens of thousands of sheets that I haven't played through and I don't know yet. And I want to learn. I'm constantly pulling out music and going, this is great. I've got to remember this and take a note about that. And I will have a friend come over and we'll just sight sing through music and just grab a big pile of standards, not from shows or films, in addition to various folders from shows and films, and just start singing through songs and learning songs. And that keeps me so occupied. And occasionally doing some online concerts. I've done a number of concerts for an organization that you were on the board, and I'm on the board of the American Popular Song Society. I did an afternoon of Arthur Siegel songs, which is how my whole sheet music collection started, with Arthur Siegel, and also of Lou Spence, who wrote That Face and Nice and Easy. And I've done a number of concerts of the songs of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I've done some online work, done some online coaching. I mean, I usually travel to teach. I travel all around the world teaching. I've been to Australia twice a year for the past 10 years teaching there at the various conservatories. And the fact that I can't travel now means that some of my students come to me online and say, can we do an online coaching, which is fine, as long as I would usually send them accompaniment and then they can sing to that accompaniment so we don't have the delay problem, and recommend new material to them to sing for auditions, because all my Australian friends, they're all back working. You know, Australia has now playing Frozen, Come From Away. Moulin Rouge is about to announce its cast. Hamilton's in the middle of rehearsals. I mean, did
you see the article that was in the New York Times about how
today, yeah.
What is it in Australia that they are able to go back into theaters? And from what I understand, the people that are going to the theaters are not wearing masks. They are going as we used to go to the theater. What's the difference?
They shut down immediately. As soon as this started, I was in Australia until March 21st. And if you remember how late that is, that's pretty late. I was teaching there from March 1st to 21st. I was scheduled to continue. I was in Perth Adelaide, Melbourne was scheduled to go on to Brisbane and Sydney and then to Los Angeles for several weeks, but I came right back here. And they immediately, right after I left, they shut down the country. Nobody could get in. They made it a crime. You would be arrested or fined a lot of money if you were out on the street without a mask, or really out on the street for anything, unless you're walking your dog quickly. And here, nobody. They had no restrictions, so people continue doing things much, much longer than they should have. They were the smart country. New Zealand even smarter than they were. Of course, it's a remote country, and it's not that many people go there. And once they shut it down, nobody went there. So I think it was much easier for them to fix things quickly. And that's how they did.
Well, it's funny. I know a lot of people would like me to shut up and go away. They probably still wish that because I won't stop begging people to pull back a little bit. I truly believe that until we do a shutdown, I mean, we're in winter right now. Let's do what all the animals do. Let's hibernate. And let's just get through the next month and then open everything. And I think we'll be able to come back bigger and better and stronger. It concerns me that so many, I see, and forgive me, I see pictures of theaters that are open in Florida. I see people in our own country, many people from New York who are down in Florida, going to shows, doing these things, and not following the restrictions. I don't know if you agree with me or not.
Sure. And everybody is itching to get out there. And
I am.
But let's not do it till it's safe,
Well, what did you? I know that you were in Australia. When did you first start hearing about COVID? And what were your biggest concerns? And if you're like most people, you probably thought this will be a short-lived thing and we'll get on with our lives again.
I didn't necessarily think that, but I started hearing about it right before. I was actually in London and Israel in January and February, and I heard vaguely about it, but it wasn't a big deal. Even the beginning of February when I was still in London. And then I got back and heard a little more, and I knew I was scheduled to leave on March 1st, or I actually left on February 28th, spent all of February 29th, the only time one of the five, the few times we have in the air, and then arrived in Australia on March 1st. And by that point, there was a lot more talk about it, but things weren't shutting down, at least in Australia, because it's so remote. And the first city I was in was Perth, which if you look at Australia, it's the equivalent of Los Angeles, all the way on the left side. And that's one of the most remote cities in the world. So everybody was fine. I never heard about it at all the 10 days I was in Perth. By the time I got to Adelaide, which is still remote, but a much bigger city, there was an arts festival, and there were people all over the street walking around. And you heard about it, but it still wasn't. By the time I got to Melbourne, which is not until like March 18th or 17th, of course, it was totally in the news. One of the companies I was scheduled to teach at, it closed down. The other one was still open, actually. And then Qantas announced they were shutting down the flights. And then I just thought, okay. And when I arrived in JFK, to the ghost town that it was JFK back then, last March 21st, when I arrived at night and there was nobody, I had to get a cab somehow. And then I thought, okay, this is serious. Then I realized.
Well, I have to ask you, because I've always dreamed of going to Australia, but I've never wanted to make the trip because of the trip itself. And you do it a lot. I want to know, first of all, how did it all start for you with your teaching in Australia? And how do you get your mind wrapped around the travel, unless obviously that you love it?
I do love travel. I'm a little obsessive about, like, if you've seen Up in the Air, the movie with George Clooney, I'm not at that extreme, but I am an extreme traveler. And I am executive platinum on American Airlines, meaning you have to fly 100,000 actual flown miles in a calendar year. And I've been executive platinum for many years, which means that I get upgraded for free. So I'll buy an inexpensive economy ticket and sit in business class, which is much nicer, especially on a trip like Australia. And the Australian story is actually an amusing one, because I was in Arby's. There used to be an Arby's at 49th and Broadway. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I do.
It became Tony Roma's. And then I don't know what it is now, but in 1985, I was on my way to the videotaping of Sunday in the Park with George. They were filming it for television, and I was going, but my friend and I decided to have lunch at Arby's. And we saw this couple across the way, and they had the vocal selections to Merrily We Roll Along. And I said, let's go chat with them. They look like fun. And it was a young man named Guy Simpson and his new wife, Allison Simpson, and they were on holiday. They'd been married a couple of years, but they were on holiday, and we exchanged information. And Guy was a pianist in Sydney. He'd never really done anything. Now he is like the Paul Gemignani of Australia. He is the top musical director, musical supervisor for all of Andrew Lloyd Webber's shows, all of Cameron McIntosh's shows. He's done everything. I just saw him conduct My Fair Lady that Julie Andrews directed in Sydney a few years ago, and then recently Evita there at Sydney Opera House. So he got me in touch. He did a production of Company, the Australian premiere of Company, which starred Geraldine Turner, who's a big musical theater star in Australia. And I now know like everybody in that cast. Little Tony Sheldon was in that cast when he was, in his 20s. And they sent me a program, and I started getting in touch with a lot of these people. And in 1989, I put up a couple of friends from Australia, new friends from Australia. And now my place here is known as the Hostel for Visiting Australians, because I put up Australians all the time, and I know I will never want for a place to stay over there. But I went over there in '89, was there for a few weeks visiting all the different cities. Then it took me around 15 years to get back, but by '04, I had so many more friends. And by '09, I just started going all the time, teaching at all the conservatories, starting at WAPA, which is the Western Australian Academy of the Performing Arts in Perth. That's where little Hugh Jackman went to school. And I love teaching there because that's really the creme de la creme. I mean, they're all good. There's a very dedicated number of people who want to be actors there, but there's so few shows done there. So a lot of them, several of my friends have won the lottery to work here and do theater here, Australian friends. And it's a pleasure. I just love working there. You're going to love it, Richard, when you go there. It's just really fantastic.
Well, hopefully that will happen. I mean, one of the things that I love about you, Michael, among many other things, is that you truly have created your own niche in the world of theater and cabaret. And you are the go-to person. But I want to talk about the path that led to that. In my research, I know that both of your parents loved the theater. Your father was also performed. Am I correct?
He was a clarinetist, saxophonist. He played in the big bands in the 1940s. And my mom's played piano for years. And she grew up in New York City. And they lived in New York when they were first married. I was conceived and born in New York City. And they got me interested in it. I remember being 4 or 5 years old in Washington, D.C. at the Carter Barron Amphitheater, outdoor theater, seeing Mary Martin and Peter Pan. And my dad had me on his shoulders, and I remember being held up so I could see Mary Martin. It was incredible. And I remember they had the album Valmouth. You know Valmouth musical.
Oh yeah.
I remember they had that album. They had Dime a Dozen, the Julius Monk revue album. They had albums of theater. My mother, when she was, I've told the story before, but when she was young, she went on a date with this guy to New Haven to the very first opening night of My Fair Lady in New Haven before it came to Broadway, and she was sitting next to Moss Hart, who was the director, who had a yellow legal pen, was writing his notes. She's watching this right now. My mom was 96 right now, watching from Bethesda, Maryland, enjoying.
Hi, Mom. And thank you, Mom.
Thank you. I think she got that story right, but I tell that story a lot. So I was.
Did your mom know, sitting next to Moss Hart, that it was Moss Hart?
Oh, I think she. Oh, sure, because she tells the story. Yeah, and she knew him because he was married to Kitty Carlisle, and she knew who that was. And I told Kitty Carlisle this story also. It's fun, long story. And that actually brings me to one of my show and tell items today, because and we can talk for a minute about him. My mentor for 15 years was Peter Howard. Peter Howard, the great dance arranger and conductor on Broadway. One of Peter's first jobs was he was the man who taught Rex Harrison how to sing his songs in My Fair Lady. He was the pianist, but he was given the task of working with Rex and getting him comfortable. So when Peter passed away around 13 years ago, I inherited his sheet music, and I had lots of songs that he wrote, wonderful other things. But one of the things his son sent me was a score to My Fair Lady. And this is the hardbound score to what My Fair Lady looks like. But you can guess, if you can, that inside it's got signatures of everybody from Julie Andrews and Rex Harrison. When you go to the next page, you can see Lerner and Lowe and Moss Hart and Hanya Holm, all the people involved. So I love signatures.
Michael, that in some countries, if someone admires something, you give it to them.
Right, yes, exactly. But I mean, one of the things, so I love getting signatures. And one of my dear friends was Hugh Martin.
Oh, wow.
You out there who don't know Hugh Martin, he wrote a little song called Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Maybe you know it. He also wrote the trolley song,
Yes, yeah.
Boy Next Door. People think it's Martin and Blaine because his collaborator was Ralph Blaine. But the secret of it was that they rarely, if ever, truly collaborated. They would show up every morning and say, they would say, what'd you write? Well, Hugh would say, well, I wrote, he was this genteel man from Alabama. I'd say, well, I wrote the trolley song. What'd you write, Ralph? And Ralph said, well, I wrote Buckle Down Woonsocket, because that was kind of Ralph's style.
Yes.
But I loved visiting Hugh, and he lived in Encinitas. He died around 10 years ago at the age of 96. And I love his songs. He would call me and say, hi, Michael, how are you? And I go, Hugh, I love you, because I just love his songs, and I love sharing them with people. This is a score he wrote in London. It's called Love from Judy. And it's been remade as, it was a movie called Daddy Longlegs with Fred Astaire.
Yes.
And Hugh wrote, you can see, here's his signature and his notes on what he wrote to me here.
Go back. Yes.
He said, hi, dear Michael, doing this show is one of the happiest experiences of my life. British theater people are fabulous to work with, almost no ego and the most delicious wit in the world. Take a tip from me, Michael. Go West End, with loving thoughts, Hugh. So I love showing that.
That's great.
I mean, I would go and sing old songs of the 20s and 30s. I had a friend, you may have known Richard, some of you out there knew him, named Roger Sturdivant. Roger was a casting director, but he had great knowledge of musical theater of the teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And we would make a pile of old songs from that era that he thought Hugh would love, and I would go and sing them for Hugh. And he would go, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about that. And he would actually coach me. Like he was Judy Garland's coach and had his own dressing room at the Palace Theater when he was working with Judy Garland. And he would coach me saying, you're over singing. You're singing too much. Can you sing a little less? And I would go, oh, yes, Hugh, whatever you say. And then eventually I played him a song from Saturday Night. I played by Stephen, which was written by a 24-year-old Stephen Sondheim. And he said, and I thought I knew Sondheim, so I said, why don't I write to Sondheim and say, what else would you, because I knew Sondheim is a big fan of Hugh's also, what would you like me to sing of your work to Hugh? And he said, well, would you sing him the rest of the score to Saturday Night? So I did, and there's this song, great patter song called Exhibit A, about how to woo a woman. You know, you go through Exhibit A, B, C, and this is I rest my case. And I sang it, and he was like, that's wonderful. Can you go over here and read those lyrics to me? I loved doing that. It was just great. And then when I took Roger Sturdivant over there, they were talking about Hazel Flagg, musical by Julie Stein. And Roger said, well, I remember the title song. I went, hello, Hazel. And he started singing it. And Hugh went, oh, my God, I wrote that. Julie Stein didn't have time to write the title song, so I ghost wrote it as Julie Stein. And it says, you think Julie Stein wrote it. Here's a little tidbit not a lot of people know. Hugh Martin wrote that song. So I love Hugh. I love composers in general, songwriters in general, and I love spending time with them, having them over here to sign my sheet music. I've had Adolph Green over here countless times because we were good friends. Sheldon Harnick has been here. I was friends with a guy, you probably knew him, Richard, named John Wallowich. You know John?
Oh, John Wallowich and I wish that I had his photograph here. It's on the piano in the next room with one of his bow ties hanging over the piano, over the photo. John Wallowich and I shared a birthday.
Well, I love that. So it's this month.
Yes, February 11th. So every year we would get together on our birthdays. And you'll go on with the story. But when John died, he's buried in Valhalla. We read his funeral. And, Danny's bringing it in. See, it helps. Show and tell. Here's John Wallowich and myself. Here's his bow tie that hangs.
Oh, you have his bow tie. Wow.
Yes. And John Wallowich, when he died, his grave actually is up on a hill. Do you know this? Looking down on Rachmaninoff's grave.
Oh, wow.
Because he said he always wanted to be able to look down on Rachmaninoff. And he got the plot. But
so
anyway,
a lot of you don't know John's work, but I'm trying to change that. My friend is watching today, our friend Jacqueline Parker.
Jackie Parker.
Jacqueline and I have been trying to amass all of John's sheet music, and we're up to over 100 songs. We're trying to get it to 200, and we're going to proliferate them, get them done, get them recorded, maybe do a recording of some of the ones that have not been recorded. And I found this. This was signed to Jackie from John Wallowich. This is a Tony Bennett song that John wrote. And who knew that they actually published it? Did you know they published this, Richard?
I did not.
I know.
I will tell everybody, John Wallowich used to have a Manhattan Access show.
Public access, yes.
When I first discovered John Wallowich, it was in the early days of my starting to perform as Carol Channing. I used to call the show as Carol, and over the phone, I would sing and he would play. And the first time I did it, he started to cry because he thought it was Carol. By the third time, he realized, why would Carol Channing be calling me every Saturday night?
And it'd be the closest he's heard to, if you learned some of John's songs, it would be the closest John would ever get to hearing Carol Channing singing his own songs. Because we, experienced that. We remember watching his public access show before La Cage aux Folles opened, and he was singing all the songs from La Cage aux Folles because Jerry Herman gave them to him, and I knew all those songs before. I love hearing songs and then going to the show and you know the songs already. Which reminds me of another story. I have a friend named Stephen Cole. You probably know him, Richard.
Oh, I know Stephen. Hello, Stephen, if you're watching.
So Steve this is a story. Billy Byers, famous Broadway orchestrator, was working on City of Angels, and he threw out his whole score because they were redoing them, all the songs, and he threw them in the trash can. Steve, or a friend of Steve's, found this score and gave it to me. So this is long before they started the first preview. Like they barely started rehearsals. So I would play through all the songs from City of Angels. And I knew that entire score before the show started performances. Then I went to an early preview and I kept going, that's not how that song goes. That should go twice as fast as that. I should go slower, because I knew the song the way I was playing them, not the way they really were. But I knew I have all those early versions of the songs from City of Angels, and I love that. And talking about composers, you're talking about John Wallowich. And when our friend Steven Grinberg, who makes a living impersonating Barbra Streisand, when he loves Grey Gardens. He's a little obsessed with it, and he worked up Another Summer in a Winter Town, or Another Winter in a Summer Town from Grey Gardens, and he had Scott Frankel and Michael Corey come to the show, and Scott started crying afterwards because it was the closest he'll ever get to Barbra Streisand singing his song. So it's just
not necessarily. If Barbara's listening, maybe she'll record it on her next album.
Yeah.
But Stephen did it first.
Right. There you go.
So I want to ask you, do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a younger sister. She's a grant writer, and she lives 2 blocks away from here. She has a dog named Memphis that I go and visit Memphis and Amy all the time. They live in Lincoln Towers, and I walk Memphis. We watch a lot of television together. She comes over here with Memphis every Friday, and we watch WandaVision on television and watch a movie. We watched a terrific movie this week, which I'm blanking on the name of, with Rosamund Pike, that you should all see, if I remember the name of it.
Now, obviously, you grew up in a household that was surrounded by music, obviously. But what was the deciding factor? I know that there's a documentary out, which I just watched again last week in preparation for my interview with Ann Morrison. And I'm watching this little kid get up and sing Johnny One Note. And of course, I had to stop, rewind, and it was you.
Well, yeah, I wasn't that little. I was 19, but
by today's standard, you were a kid.
Yes, but we're the same age. But I was the I went. By then, I'd known Sondheim, and he said, "Look, if there's one show you audition for, you should audition for mine because we're casting it with kids, and you're a kid." So I got to the old Minskoff rehearsal studios in the Minskoff building. Got there at 7:00 in the morning. There was nobody there, but somebody had put a sign-up sheet. It was an open call. So I thought, well, I could put myself at number 1. No, I'll put myself at number 7. And one of my good friends from summer camp was Robin Morse, the daughter of one of the 3 daughters of Robert Morse. I'd gone to French Woods summer theater camp with, and she was in Fiorello, where I played Fiorello, and her sisters were in it. And she got there. She said, "Why didn't you sign me up?" I said, "I didn't know." So I remember that Sondheim asked me, "So what are you going to sing?" He called me the day before. I said, "Johnny One Note," really enthusiastic. And he went, "Oh, okay." Because if I knew then what I know now, I don't think I would have sung it. But they typed us in, and I got typed in because I was young. And then I started it, and I started singing, which you can see in the movie. And then what you don't see is Paul Giamatti stops and says, okay, go to the end of the song. And I went, sing Johnny one note out loud. And the whole idea of the song is that he can only sing one note, so I probably should not have gone to the F. But I knew I didn't get called back, but I had a great time. And you can.
Were you surprised when the documentary came out that you were in it, or did you know that you were going to be in the documentary?
I did, because Lonnie Price has been a friend since before Merrily We Roll Along. I've known him forever. And I remember the first time I met Lonnie and Jim Weisenbeck, who was the original Franklin Shepherd in previews. The three of us went to see a Wednesday matinee of the musical Copperfield on Broadway. And coincidentally, I'd gotten a postcard from Sondheim that day saying that Anne Morrison was cast, and I showed it to them. They were like, oh, we've heard all about her. Oh, you're the first person to tell us that she's going to be in the show. And Annie's become a good friend. She's stayed here in my apartment a number of times. Her son stayed here. I feel very close to Annie, and she's the best. And but Lonnie told me, he said, by the way, if he went to me because he knew I had seen Merrily We Roll Along 10 times between previews and opening night, and every night I saw a different show. And I had my little TCS 310 Sony tape recorder, and I would record it, every single one of those performances. Wonderful tapes, wonderful archives, but I didn't have the tapes. A friend had them, and Lonnie wanted to get them to play them in this movie, but I didn't have them. But then he said to me, by the way, you're in the movie. And I went to the first New York Film Festival screening of it at Avery Fisher at Alice Tully Hall. As I was walking in with some friends, all my friends were around me, including some of the Merrily cast, and Lonnie came up and said, you're in the movie. I was like, okay. In the back of my mind, I remembered they were filming a documentary for ABC, and I thought, that can't be it. So your audience can watch this movie on Netflix, and it's called The Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened. And
speaking of seeing shows many times, I came to New York in 1979, 18 years old, and the big hit, Sweeney Todd. And not only did you see it many times from the house, but I understand that there were several times that you saw it from the wings.
That's true. I saw it when it first opened in April of '79 with my family. And then I was, and I've kind of told these stories a lot. You probably heard them on our friend Charles Hirsch is watching now. Hello, Charles. And Charles told the story on Charles's show. You should watch listen to Charles's podcast called Backstage Babble. I went to a performance of it in like December of '79, because I went to Columbia. Barack Obama was my classmate, and got to New York in August of '79. I had the choice of going on the Circle Line cruise with the other kids. We're going to see a Broadway show. I thought, I'm going to go see Best Little Horse Goes Texas. So a couple of months after that, I go to see Sweeney. I'm standing at the 50th Street platform waiting for the subway. I realize I'm standing amongst all the chorus of Sweeney Todd. I'm looking around going, oh, there's Michael Kalinian, there's this person. And then one of them they all come up to me and start chatting with me. And one of them says, well, dear boy, I give voice lessons. And I was like, and this was Joaquin Romaguera, who was the original Pirelli, the Italian barber at Sweeney Todd. And I would play for his other students and get half-price lessons. And he made me realize I was a tenor. I could sing really high with Joaquin. And I would go often, when I didn't go to the show, I would go to the stage door and go up to his dressing room and hang out with him. His dressing room was next to Ed Lindeck, who was the original Judge Turpin, and Ken Jennings, who I then eventually started coaching regularly. And he was the original Tobias. So the three of them were on the higher floor. And the first time I did this, in the middle of the show, Joaquin said, come with me, dear boy. And I stood behind a pillar, and if I went like this, I'd be in full view of the audience. He said, I'll be right back. And he sang, sing your razor high. And it was great. I remember being in Angela Lansbury and Lynn Carrier's last performance, which was the first time I met Stephen Sondheim, and Eartha Kitt was there. All these people were there backstage. It was an incredible time to be able to see that show with that orchestra and those orchestrations and that set and that cast that many times was a thrill, really a thrill.
Wow. Well, let's go back to your collection. What was the first, most obscure piece of music that you collected?
Gosh, I don't think I know. I think I have so many obscure things, but I can't think what the first obscure one, because I just...
Well, how did it start for you that you started collecting music? I mean, obviously, when you start collecting things, you don't start out thinking that you're going to have one of the largest collections in the world, if not the largest collection. But how does that start out for you?
When I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s, my family would go to visit my grandmother, my mother's mother, in New York City. And we went to a little sheet music shop, not that little, called Hanson's, which was right here where I live in Lincoln Center. It was right over on Broadway, where Columbus meets Broadway at 66th Street. And I remember going there.
Near the ballet store?
And they had a, well, no, it was on the east side of Broadway, near Columbus. It's about where Columbus, where 66th, and where ABC News is, right across from ABC News.
Okay.
And they had a half-price sale. So everything was half-price. I saw the score to Company. And by this point, this was like maybe 1975, 76. I knew of Company. I knew of Follies. And they had the score, the $25 score for sale for $12.50. I said, I have to buy this. So that was one of my first acquisitions. Not rare, but I remember the Company score. I had it. And then when I started Columbia, I would go to sheet music shops that have since been gone. There was a place called the Music Exchange. Do you remember that, Richard? It was in there.
I do.
Enormous store. I mean, massive store of sheet music. And there was another place called Lincoln Square Sheet Music, which was in the Ansonia. And they had, I remember the first time I went there, I found Your Eyes Are Blue and Love Is in the Air, 2 songs that were cut from A Funny Thing Happened to the Foreign that were published. And I bought those. So I was those may have been 2 of the earliest really rare songs that I bought. But I started buying when I was at college and collecting just on my shelf at my dorm room. My roommate was in the business and liked it, things, and said this was exciting, you're buying all this stuff. And then once I graduated, I had banker's boxes with the sheet music, and I spent some time. Since I'm from Bethesda, I would go down to visit my parents, and I would go to the Library of Congress, and you can copy to your heart's content. And I would start copying lots of sheet music, and I would go down and just start going through shows and copying everything that looked interesting. And I remember one of the times I was standing next to the two big Xerox machines, and I started chatting with the other guy there, the gentleman there, and we were talking about everything, about Sondheim. He was a fan of Sondheim. And that turned out to be Marc Horowitz, who's the music specialist, Library of Congress, one of Sondheim's friends. He's become a dear friend. We went out to San Diego to see the opening night of Into the Woods before it came to Broadway together. And I met him because of the sheet music thing. But I become friendly with a man named Arthur Siegel, who wrote all the New Faces reviews in the 50s. And Arthur lived across the street from me. So he would come over with Roger Sturdivant, I was telling you about, and Steve Ross, and we would sit on the floor or on chairs with all my sheet music and going through it. And Arthur would go, "Ooh, can I borrow that?" And he borrowed some of his music. And when he died in 1994, I went over there because he had some things of mine. And Brian Gary, who wrote Late Night Comic, who's Eddie Cantor's grandson, he was in charge of the estate because he was one of Arthur's closest friends. And he said, "Would you be interested in buying the whole collection?" And Arthur had been collecting since he was 10 years old. And people like Richard Rodgers and Julie Stein would give him all kinds of sheet music saying, "Keep our stuff alive." So it was a whole day of bringing file cabinets over to my apartment, and I started going through. One of the things I found was this silk-covered, hardbound selection book to Red Hot and Blue, the Cole Porter show. And what makes it probably worth a bit of money is that in the back it's numbered and signed by Cole Porter. So when I had Michael Feinstein was over here, he said, "Oh yeah, mine's number 79."
Jackie Parker is going to want that now.
Yeah, she's going to say that.
But let me ask you a question. You've got this incredible collection. Is everything insured? I hope it is.
I did for many years. I insured my apartment, but you can see behind me my file cabinets that are really safe and everything. At the moment, I don't have insurance on the apartment because I don't think I need it, and I feel like.
I will say this. Today is a dear friend's birthday. I'm going to drop a name, Tommy Toon. And Tommy Toon, he had everything in storage. I don't know if you know this, on 23rd Street, below street level. And when Hurricane Sandy came through, he lost everything.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'm hoping that you do find a way of getting everything insured.
Yeah,
it can be replaced. Obviously, but especially something such as Red Hot and Blue signed by.
There's a lot of things like that. I mean, because have you heard of the show Away We Go, Richard?
Of course, Oklahoma.
Well, Away We Go, for your audience who may or may not know, was a show that was the title of Oklahoma and was out of town. And I have several sheets here that I got from Arthur, or actually I got these from other places. These are the sheets from. This is what Away We Go looked like. But the rarest of them all is a song that was cut from Away We Go before it became Oklahoma, Boys and Girls Like You and Me. And if you notice, it's signed by Celeste Holm, George S. Irving, and Joan Roberts. Did you know that the original Ado Annie and original Laurie died within 2 weeks of each other, both at the age of 95 a few years ago? and I knew them both. And Joan I would send sheet music to. Celeste I actually knew. And so I love the thing is I love sharing this stuff with people. My collection, Feinstein feels the same way. We've said this
now
many times.
I want to talk about one of my favorite shows, and I think you know which one I'm going to go for. Hello, Dolly. There was a song called "Come to Be My Butterfly," and it was in the show for quite some time. And if you have the original cast album, there are actually photographs from that production. When I interviewed Jerry Herman, he told me that when the show opened on Broadway, Critic said that that was the weakest link in the show, and Gower Champion worked to get it taken out. It was eventually replaced by the polka number. And we recently had a revival of Dolly a couple of years ago, and my hope was, along with Jerry, would be that that number would be replaced in the show. What are your thoughts on that number, and why, beyond the fact that Gower made that decision to cut it, that it has never been put in any other production since then?
You mean Come and Be My Butterfly?
Yes.
Come and Be My Butterfly, I don't know if you know this, Richard. There are two versions of the published vocal score for Hello, Dolly, and one of them has the song in the score. So anybody could do it, but since the orchestrations don't exist, or they're not, you'd have to reorchestrate it, and that's expensive. And most people don't know. And the only reason they put Penny in My Pocket into the revival was because Leroy Reams had been doing it and mentioned it to somebody who mentioned it to somebody. Somehow it got back to Jerry Zaks, and they thought, let's put that in. But I think it may have been Mark York, who was Jerry Herman's librarian, who mentioned it. But when I inherited Peter Howard's collection, one of the things I found was a folder marked Hello, Dolly, and this has nothing but cut songs, and it's a pretty thick folder full of around 10 cut songs from Hello, Dolly. I don't know if you know any of them, Richard, but there's a song, you can hear me sing this on my podcast with Charles Kirsch, a song called, it's an obscure song called It Takes a Woman, but this is not the It Takes a Woman that you know, Richard. This is a song in 4-foot cut time that is a fun song. There's a song called, and Richard can tell you what the appropriateness of this song is. It's called You're a Damned Exasperated Woman,
which was the working title
of the show. And there's a song called No, A Million Times No. Most of these are written for the character of Vandergelder. He had a lot of songs that were cut. I have a song called Goodbye. You know a piece of it, but it's actually 4 times longer with sections you've never heard before. And a song called Ernestina, all about the wonders of Ernest. I can go on. A great song we love. I get so excited because this song called This Time is such a typical Jerry Herman song. And I wish I'd talked to Jerry about these. I knew Jerry because I went to college at Columbia with a woman named Jane Dorian. Jane was one of my closest friends when I was at Columbia. And we were in a production of Macbeth together when we were 18 and 19. And she also...
Scottish play.
What's that?
The Scottish play.
We're not in the theater yet.
Okay.
But she had also auditioned for Merrily We Roll Along, where she met the kid auditioning with her, Jim Weissenbach, and they ended up dating for a while. And we went, the whole bunch of the Merrily cast went to see Hello, Dolly at Westbury Music Fair with Carol Channing because they're the next, Frank, the new star of the new Sondheim show, was going to be playing Barnaby, and they wish they cast him because he was going to be the star of the next Sondheim show. And I remember that vividly. So Jane's mom, Carol, went to college with Jerry Herman and was his best friend and sang all his backers' auditions. And when she came to see me, I played the porter in the Scottish play. She said, I love him. Let's have him to dinner with Jerry. So I went over. This was in 1980, and Day in Hollywood Night in Ukraine had just opened. And Jerry told us a story about working on that, how he was brought in by Tommy Tune. And when Tommy Tune came over here, I told him the same story. He said, that's totally the story. And we talked and totally hit it off. And a few years later, they were doing Mac and Mabel at Paper Mill Playhouse with Janet Metz and Lee Horsley. And Jerry said, let's go with Michael and Carol and me, and we'll go to see it. So I ran over to Carol's apartment, was picked up in an enormous stretch limo, sat in there with Carol and Jerry, sat between Carol and Jerry. Jerry kept like nudging me when things were happening. I'm like, this is so surreal. At the end of the show, he said, I'll be right back. And he went downstage. And after the bows, he comes out, puts his arms around each of them and walks theatrically upstage. It was so great seeing him. And I last saw him when he was the guest at the Outer Critics Circle Awards. I've been the pianist for them every year. and he was the kind of the MC, which actually wasn't surprising not that long ago. And I brought my sheet music, and he signed it, all my sheet music. A song called Beautiful. Do you know the song called Beautiful from a show called Madame Aphrodite? You ever heard of that show, Richard?
I know the show, but I don't know the song.
The song goes, "The rain isn't called beautiful." So it's the exact same melody as A Little More Mascara from La Cage aux Folles. And Jerry signed my music and wrote AKA Mascara. So at least he knew writing the song. Just like it's today is There's No Tune Like a Show Tune. Sometimes they recycle things like Julie Stein used to do. But yeah, that's my Jerry Herman story.
Is there an obscure piece of music that's like a holy grail for you right now?
Yeah, I often get asked if I have holy grails. Many years ago, my holy grail was the score to Legs Diamond. And one day it just came in. It just showed up and suddenly everybody had it. I think often, since I get asked for the hot new thing that's playing on Broadway, that's not necessarily a holy grail that I care about, but I want to help people find that music and until it comes out officially. But I get a list from Wayland Bunnell. Wayland Bunnell sends sheet music out all over the world from his place in New Hampshire. It's an enormous, he gets big, I mean, like, when I say big collections, I mean like 30,000 pieces of sheet music. And he sends out lists. And I buy a lot. I go through, like I have his latest list, which is an auction. So they're going to be auctioning these songs off. And I go through and say, well, I have 3 songs from a show, and he's got the 4th and the 5th. When I first got Arthur Siegel's collection, our collections complemented each other because he would often have some songs from a show and I would have the rest of them. And it would be really nice. I think he would have been pleased to know that I'm keeping his music alive and also the music that he was collecting alive. And I've inherited a number of other collections. Elise Breton, do you know that name, Richard? Elise Breton was a wonderful vocal arranger. Her only Broadway show that she wrote the original vocal arrangements for was 1776, the original production. And her best friend growing up was a man named Sherman Edwards, who wrote the score to 1776. So I inherited her collection for free. Somebody told the person in charge, and she had, I think, as much as Arthur. I had to rent a car. She lived in the Upper West Side and just pile boxes and boxes, wonderful sheets that I didn't have, but all of her own arrangements, and she arranged for everybody. Did you know Bernie Bierman?
I did. Yes, absolutely.
And Bernie lived to be 103 years old, and I have every single song that Bernie ever wrote, hundreds of them, because Elise did all the arrangements of them. And I have wonderful arrangements of hers. She also arranged a show that closed in Washington, D.C. without coming to Broadway called Swing. This was around 40 years ago. It was by Alfred Urey, that great comedy lyricist who wrote The Robber Bridegroom. Kind of joking because he wrote Driving Miss Daisy, and that's what he's known for. And Robert Waldman. They wrote Here's Where I Belong, the musical of East of Eden, that Terrence McNally's first book musical that Heather McRae starred in originally. And so Elise had these wonderful. I have all these cut songs from 1776. I have all these published Sherman Edwards songs you don't know by Sherman Edwards. And I just spoke to somebody the other day who's going to be in the new revival of 1776. She said, we heard a demo of Sherman singing a lot of these songs. I said, it's fun.
I mean, I want to ask you a question that's on the minds of some people, that you have such a love of this music and the legacy of this music. When you hear of a revival where certain songs are going to be cut, or a revisal, what are your thoughts with new people coming in and putting their own spin on these shows that both you and I have come to love?
I think I tend to be a purist and tend to like them the way they were. I like to keep an open mind and go in and say, okay, let me see what they did. Okay, not what I would have done, but sometimes I won't say that. Sometimes I'll say, oh, they really did a nice job. For example, did you see last year there was a revisal of The Unsinkable Molly Brown downtown, which was fascinating because they took a lot of other songs of Meredith Willson's and put them in, and it was a reworking of the show. And it also starred the brilliant Beth Malone, who I love to death. And I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I like to imagine that the composer or lyricist who have often passed away are out there going, really, wasn't what I wrote good enough for you? Why did you have to cut that song? Like, I think George Firth was a dear friend. I used to stay with George in Beverly Hills, and I think he would have been intrigued, I like to say at the very least, by what they've done to Company. I hear it's great. I look forward to seeing it.
I had tickets to see it April 1st of last year.
But he would have, I think, would have loved to have had his own say on this. and not had
You know,
something.
it's the same thing. I mean, I did the Unsinkable Molly Brown and in stock many years ago, and then when you see the movie, and with very few exceptions, it's a completely new score. Comden and Green share a great story about the film version of On the Town. Do you know that story?
No, tell me.
Roger Edens. Well, Gene Kelly had seen On the Town. Let me back up. Louis B. Mayer's secretary saw it on Broadway and fell in love with it. And she called Louis B. Mayer and said, "Get the rights to this immediately," which he did. And then he found out that Leonard Bernstein had done the music. So it sat in a vault for about 7 years until Gene Kelly decided that he wanted to make it into a musical. And except for, I think, 3 songs from the original, Roger Edens was brought in to write all the music for it. And
Betty Adolph still wrote the lyrics.
Yes, but they were not happy about it.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I like a lot of the songs they wrote for the movie. I love You're Awful. I think On the Town's fun, but I love the original score. It's so great that I don't, you think, why did, and that happens a lot with movies where they, for some reason, cut songs. Sometimes for good reasons. You think they don't work. Sometimes you're like, oh, I missed that song. Why didn't they?
Well, give us an example in your own opinion of a change that was made from stage to screen that you think benefited the film or the storyline more so than what it was when it was on stage.
Gosh, I don't think that that's usually the case. I think that's usually not the case. So I think I like to say that I think that sometimes, but usually I'm thinking, oh, why did they have to do that? I think that's my usual reaction.
And beyond the Unsinkable Molly Brown, has there been another show that you had a knee-jerk reaction, but you went to see it and you were completely bowled over?
Yeah, I wasn't bowled over by Unsinkable Molly Brown necessarily. I just think I was intrigued that they did all this work. But I mean, you mean a revisal or a show in general?
A show in general.
Well, there's a show I've always been a fan of that I talked about with Charles on my podcast with Charles called the Mooney Shapiro Songbook. In London, it was called Songbook. It was a big hit in London. They did a side-by-side by Sondheim about a fictional composer that they made up. And it was Monty Norman and Julian Moore who wrote Irma La Douce. They also wrote, Julian wrote the theme to James Bond theme. And so they went through all of his periods. They did like the 20s and 30s when he was writing like Gershwin, up to the 70s when he was writing like Sondheim. And Hal Prince was actually loved the show and was a voice on the show. Said, I like Mooney Shapiro. And I love the show so much. It was the last show ever to play the Morosco Theater before they tore it down. And the 5-member cast was Annie McGreevy, who was in the original cast of The Magic Show, who I used to coach all the time. She used to be married to Bob Gunton, and I love her. Judy Kay, who sang, her big song was called Don't Play That Love Song Anymore, Sam. As in Play It Again, Sam. And she did that song in her cabaret act, I remember back then. Who were the other 3? The other 3 were Timothy Jerome, who you may know from a lot of musicals, Gary Beach, the late Gary Beach, who was brilliant in the show, and last but not least, that great musical comedy star, Jeff Goldblum. And I saw the show more than once. It closed and opened opening night, but it did preview for a bit. And I loved it so much from hearing the CD, the recording, the cassette, that I spent months transcribing every song and writing them out. And then I went to London to study for 6 months and bought the score oversized for 20 pounds. And so that's a show has a real deep place in my heart that I really love.
Well, what's the one show that you saw more times than any other?
Probably Sweeney Todd, because I saw it, I think it was around 15 times, because I would go back then, you had color-coded tickets. They were the old tickets, not the computer tickets. Do you know what the first show to have a computer ticket was?
No.
On Broadway? It was Gilda Radner on Broadway, live on Broadway. There's a little piece of trivia for you. But I had the old tickets, and they would give you the stub without the title. But I would tear the ticket before I went in. I was a box office treasurer's nightmare, and I would go in with the stub that I had in my possession. So I have all my stubs with the titles of the shows on them because I wanted. But then I would know what color was being used for what day and pretend I'd already be in. I'm just telling you a terrible thing. And I would sneak in to see Sweeney Todd again. And I did that a number of times before I would go to the dressing room of Joaquin. So Sweeney was a show, that original production, that I just loved going to. The first show I second acted was the original production of Day in Hollywood, Night in Ukraine, where back then it was much easier to second act.
Sure
You stood
was.
outside and you walked in with everybody else. There was no security. It was very easy. It was a show I loved. And the second act was a Marx Brothers musical. So I loved the first act, but it was a show I loved. I told Tommy Tune the same story. And I went opening night and remember like, there's Tommy Tune. Just look at the tallest guy there
Right.
in the room. And that was a show. And I also had certain shows, you just have a certain affinity for. You just want to see them again and again.
And I have to ask you, what were your feelings when the Colony left us in New York?
Oh, it was very sad. There were other music stores in New York when Colony left. Colony was at 49th and Broadway in the Brill Building.
Mm-hmm.
And I had become very good friends with Robert Irvin. Robert Irvin described himself as he looks like Mick Jagger. He looked like a drug dealer, Mick Jagger. Was there for years and years and years at Colony. And between us, with Colony's gone, I can say this, he would say, what do you need? I need the selections to that, and that. And he said, okay, I just nabbed them for you. I'm giving them to you. So I never paid for sheet music. And he would, when the store was in its last few months, we would go in the store and he'd have me carry 2 enormous bags and he'd walk out with them and I just get them. But so I loved Robert for that. But Colony, I remember buying so much of my sheet music, so many selections and scores for the regular price, $6.95, $8.95, and now I see them on sale. They're like the selections to Grind, or the musical Grind, Larry Grossman, Hal Prince show, Ben Vereen, and Stubby K, and I bought it for $8.95. Now you can't get these selections. I'm thinking, wasn't it just yesterday that I bought this?
Dana Lorge, you knew Dana.
Uh-huh.
Dana Lorge was also in Grind.
She was what? Oh, she was in Grind, right? And that was like 35 years ago, and it feels like yesterday. I remember vividly all the times I spent at Colony buying these things. And but then there was another store called Brown's. You remember Brown's Sheet Music, which was at Columbus Avenue around 60th Street, and they lasted a lot longer.
Yes.
Than Colony, or they were around a number of years after Colony. There aren't that many sheet music shops. The Juilliard store, right across the street from my apartment, actually sells sheet music and has Broadway sheet music, and you can get scores and selections there. But the easiest place to get them now, sadly, which is why so many of these stores go under, is Amazon, because you can get them usually at a discount, and often things that have gone out of print. But you can find things on eBay that have gone out of print. I rarely remember to go to eBay, but sometimes I do just scour around and I find things. I was like, wow, I want an original of that. It's like there's a book, The World of Charles Aznavour. Some of Charles Aznavour's wonderful songs. And these are most of his English translations. Some of them were by Fred Ebb, some were by Paul Klein, and they are terrific songs. And when I inherited it was a song, I had few Xeroxes, faxes of some of those songs, but I always wanted that book. And then when I got Elise Breton's collection, I'm just going through the book, there's that book. So that's the kind of thing you do. People send me in the past 2 weeks, I got one collection of around 50 just single sheets, and the other day I got another 20. People see these things and say, I've got all this music. And I'll always say yes, because you never know. You go through and go, that's that song I've always wanted, because you always have. The Holy Grail, I suppose, is something somebody asks for that I don't have. And you can often find them from libraries. There's a website, the Sheet Music Consortium, that will tell you where any song is. Often, strangely enough, it's always in one of 2 libraries. One is in St. Pancras in London. The other is in Canberra, the capital of Australia. For some reason, they have libraries that have all this out-of-print, published, but out-of-print sheet music. I have a friend who works for the libraries in Australia. They can often get me a scan. I'm trying to get friends in London to go when St. Pancras reopens to often get these songs that we're looking for, some old 40s or 50s song that none of my friends happen to have, something that was only published in London, which is often the case. For example, Damn Yankees was called, I have the title of a song from the movie of Damn Yankees. It had a different title. I think the movie I don't think it was called Whatever Lola Wants, but it was called something about Lola. It was a different title. I have the sheet music with that cover. It's fun getting things like that.
So out of all the calls that you've received looking for music, what is the one call that you got where your heart stopped?
That my heart, who was the exciting person?
You got a phone call from this person reaching out to you for music they needed.
Well, it's always exciting when it's somebody I actually know who they are. I remember Richard Rodney Bennett called me once. That was a wonderful arranger, pianist. And I loved he had an album called Different Side of Sondheim. It's great when you can call them back and say, so one of my favorites, I don't have a favorite, but I can tell you a couple of the tops, was, hello, Michael. My name is Tammy Grimes, and I've been told you have some sheet music. I'm looking for the Fool on the Hill. And of course, I keep all my celebrity messages, so I still have Tammy Grimes asking me for the Fool on the Hill.
I've got a funny story that I will end with when you finish. Okay.
And then Adolf. I have 15, 20 messages from Adolf Green, not about sheet music, but about his time. We would go to theater together. He would say, let's go to La Chinoise, which was Shun Li, this wonderful Chinese restaurant. We just did things together all the time. And I just remember spending time with him. We would sit here and sing his old songs, and he'd sing along with me, start telling me anecdotes about everything. And I just loved spending time with Adolf. He was a great guy.
Now, do you know Joel Vig?
Sure.
Yes, he was, as you know, he was very close with Tammy Grimes.
Right.
And he shared a great story that many, many years ago, she's about to open a club act in Washington, D.C. And she runs into Roscoe Brown, the great actor. And she goes up to him and she says, and I'm not going to even pretend to do a Tammy Grimes impression. I'll call Leroy Reams for that. But she walks up to Roscoe Brown and she says, I'm thinking of doing Old Man River in my club act. Do you find that offensive? He looked at her and said, my dear madam, I'm neither old nor a river. I could care less.
That's fantastic. I mean, my last story for you is Patricia Neal. Do you remember Jerry Bell, who had a company called
Oh my God, of course, yes.
I did many, many concerts. He had a group downtown. He would get, literally, you look behind you and you see the top people on Broadway. One time, Dodie Goodman was, and I know you were good friends with Dodie. Yeah. I was dear friends with Dodie, and she would come over to work with me all the time, to the point that the doormen all knew her, the handymen, and I could be coaching the youngest girl, 16-year-old girl, and say, you know Dodie Goodman from the movie of Grease, you know, ding, ding, ding. And they go, oh, I do. Yes, they all knew her. Mm-hmm. And Dodie, Dodie was hosting one of these Jerry Bell shows, and she was introducing Steve Ross, and she said, this is my friend Steve Ross. Steve, I think you go to my bank. I've seen you at my bank. But I mean, I love Dodie. And I remember
86 in Broadway.
When I would go to visit Peter Howard at the Actors Fund, at the Actors Home, when he was there staying there, we went to visit Dodie. And I would tell her about Leroy. And she said, Leroy? Is Leroy here? I said, no, Leroy's not here. It's me. But Patricia Neal did one of these shows. I took a taxi to her apartment on East End Avenue, picked her up, saw the Oscar, etc., came back to my apartment, rehearsed with her, got back in the taxi. She ended up calling my father because we realized that she and my father had the same birthday, day, date, and year. She said, this is Patricia. He wasn't there, so she left a message. This is Patricia Neal. Your son tells me you have the same birthday, so happy birthday. And then that night she showed up, and it was a big Cole Porter concert. Everybody was singing Cole Porter songs. So she sang that great Cole Porter song, Send in the Clowns. You know, isn't it rich? And it was classic, and we loved her. I'm so glad I got to work with her. And I wish
not Cole Porter, Send in the Clowns.
That's the point. I know. No, I know. That was the point.
Well, Michael, I can't believe this, but our time is up.
Well, thank you, Richard, so much.
You've got a platform. Anytime you want to come on here and talk about anything,
I would love to.
I could go on for another 3 hours, but I don't want to keep you. I don't want to keep the audience. Stick around for a few minutes, though. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you enjoyed today's show, and I hope that you did, please go to my website, richardskipper.com. Sign my guest book with your thoughts about the show if you haven't done so already. Or if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast on any of your podcast platforms, leave a message there that gives this show, and I'm talking about the show with Michael Lavine, even greater visibility in terms of building an audience for this show. So please do that. Also, tomorrow is the beginning of Cabaret Month, and I can't think of a better start. I'm celebrating Jeff Harner tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock, so please join me for that. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, the first name that pops up, pick up the phone and call that person just to let them know what they mean in your life. Not an email, not a text, not a private message, but a phone call. As our dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. You never know what someone's going through. Reach out. And Michael, I'm going to give you the final word.
Thank you, Richard, for doing
this. Want to say about anything that we talked about, thank you. Anything you want to talk about that you want to expound upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone who's watching now. And I will put this out there because you've mentioned him a few times. Charles Kirsch, I bow to you. And Backstage Babble, go and check out his podcast.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I just want to thank you, Richard. I probably turn it back to you about today, because I love that. I can't believe you've done this many interviews. I've only heard a number of them, and I was so impressed with what you do, and that you're getting people who aren't often celebrated, and that is the best thing of all. When I look at the people, I know so many people you've presented here that I'm thrilled they've been represented, like our friend J. Aubrey Jones, and of course Charles, but also just people like Tamara Jenkins. People, I've seen so many people, you're getting them known in the limelight, and I think that is just such a wonderful thing. So bravo to you. Thank you to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. And I would love to come back, Richard, anytime you'll have me.
Anytime. And remember, if there's a particular song that you're looking for, Michael Lavine is the person to reach out to, michaellavine.net. And your email address is right there on the website. So he's very accessible, easy to reach out to. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Richard.
Have a great day.
You too.